Okay, everybody, so here we are. We're 4 days away from our big launch. Everybody around here is getting really excited. You know, all the parts of the website and all the parts of the setup for our entrepreneurs, our franchises. We've got over 80 people now, getting ready for this launch that are excited for it and waiting to hear more. So, like I said, in one of the posts yesterday, because of the enormous response. Originally we said only the first 20 people are going to be a part of our first POI coaching program group, our pilot group. But we've actually expanded that to the first 100 people, which is really exciting. It's a little scary, to be honest. We only have so many people to manage it at launch, but to be honest, we're very, very excited about it. So like I said, 20 to the first 100. So, we expect a lot of people over the next few days to continue signing up and getting ready for this big launch. So we're really, really excited. So today, as I mentioned in previous videos, last video, one of the things I want to do is I want to address specific questions that have been asked about the launch. I spoke with a doctor yesterday, and, he has a multi-specialty practice. And one of the big questions was, how are you guys going to be addressing that specific need? How are you guys going to be able to support a practice that has a medical doctor, a nutritionist, a physical therapist, a chiropractor? How are you going to make sure that you can support all those different dimensions of what makes, from his perspective, a successful practice, successful business? And that's a really great question, and I want to answer that specific one, and then I want to actually take it into the context of the POI technology, which is built for basically enterprise level, right? Whether you're a business owner or a franchise owner, you want to be able to manage 5,000 of these kinds of practices. So we want to be able to answer that as well. So that's one of the questions that was asked. I think that was one of the main questions that was asked repeatedly, messaged to me, and then of course my phone conversation with the doctor. So what I want to do though is I want to connect this conversation to some more about the brain. And so yesterday we talked about the brain. We talked about the hypothalamus and how that connects to how we kind of regulate in homeostasis, and how that relates to building a really successful practice life cycle. Well, today we're actually going to talk a little bit about some of the major structures in your brain. So we all know that your brain has these things called neurons, and there are hormones that basically are the way that neurons communicate at their ends. So what's really neat about that is that there's actually a really cool connection between how your neurons fire, how your neurons work, in other words, and how they communicate and what they communicate with, and how they communicate with each other, and actually how we interact with our world, how a patient will interact with their clinician, how that clinician will interact with their coach or consultant, how that coach or consultant will then interact with their audience, with their community, right? And that all plays a really important role, because if you want to be an expert, it's really important to understand how these things tie in together, so that you're using neuroscience, you're using psychology to make sure that you're making the connections that you want and that your clients, your patients deserve. So, simply put, obviously this could get really complicated. We can talk about primary and secondary neurons and all that good stuff, depending on where they are and how they communicate and all this good stuff. But on a very basic level, we've really got three major classifications of neurons, and then a fourth that we'll talk about a little bit. So the two big ones are the sensory neuron and then the motor neuron. And what's cool about that is actually that it's pretty simple, right? You get sensory input, right? You experience something, and then you physically react in some way, right? So that's exactly how the brain works, right? So you've got this sensory input coming in, right? A consultant talks to you about the problems that you're having in managing your practice, and the result is that you then want to engage them in a conversation, or even before that, you react physically somehow, right? So you might shift in your chair because their story connected with you on a very real level, right? And so So that's really how those two interact. The one in the middle, the one between them, is called the interneuron. That really just is the one that basically communicates between them, the one that actually makes the connection happen. That one's interesting because the more you experience something, the more you do something, the more you practice something, the stronger those connections become. And that's really the crux of what we're talking about today, or with really anything that you do. If you want to become the expert, you have to help your clientele, help your community recognize you as the expert by reinforcing those connections. That means that you have to be consistently communicating with your population, with your community. So that doesn't mean that you need to be in their faces, right? It doesn't mean that you need to be too much, too often, pushing too hard. But what that does mean is that you make things available as often as possible, right? So one of the worst ways to do this today is through, those click advertisements that are all over YouTube and things like that, where you go in and then it's the most annoying thing in the world because you're trying to do something else and now suddenly somebody's trying to interrupt your behavior pattern. What you want to do, though, is start to build a new pattern that instead of watching an hour of television every day, I'm going to watch 30 minutes, and the other 30 minutes I'm going to dedicate to becoming a better practice owner, a better consultant, a better human being. And so that's the pattern that we want to justify. And to do that, the first thing we need to do is actually build content that's relevant and that's interesting, right? So in my case, for example, I'm connecting two things that are very, very interesting in the healthcare field. Number one, how we interact physically with our environment and how that connects to the way that we interact professionally with our patients, with our clients, depending on what you're doing. So that's how I've done it, right? With a patient, you might connect it to their work life or to something that they're maybe a little bit more used to. For example, I had a dentist who wanted to explain to me how your teeth reacted to braces, right? And he explained it like there are little rubber bands at the bottoms of your teeth, and as you move them, some scrunch, some get longer, and as a result, if you don't wear your retainer, the teeth will go back to the way they were, right? Just like a rubber band. And so that's really great because it creates a connection point so that I don't have to create entirely new connections in my brain, right, to make the connection and to remember, but now I've actually got a really convenient way to make a related connection, right? And those are the things that we want to do. We want to make relationships with positive things that help us build relationship, build community. So that's how we kind of interact on that level. The last piece that we'll talk about is the glial cell. This is really interesting because it's the lesser known of the family of cells in your brain. But what's interesting about it is that it's thought to basically connect, keep everything together so that your brain doesn't literally ooze out of your head. But basically, I mean, you can think of it as a barrier, right? As the glue that holds the whole thing together. And that's kind of like your BS detector. It's kind of like how you're listening to someone, you're listening to me, for example, and you're thinking to yourself, okay, this guy obviously kind of knows what he's talking about. He's, making connections that make sense. But you might listen to somebody and think, you know what, that doesn't make sense, right? And that's when your BS detector starts to go off. And it prevents information from settling, from connections being strengthened, because that one connection now isn't going to be connected to anything else, so there's no relationship now, right? And you're going to avoid experiencing that again, so that one connection is going to kind of die off. So that's interesting there. The connection that we want to make is to workflow and actually monitoring success. So the question that was asked to me was, the doctor said, how do I manage a multidisciplinary practice, right? So this is really how we want to do that. We want to actually be able to differentiate not just specialty, but cases within patient accounts, along different dimensions. So I want to be able to say things like, I've got patient Wendy Smith, and she is coming in for 4 different specialties. So I actually need 4 different cases for Wendy. So I need to keep my financials in line if she's paying ahead of time for 2 of her specialties, but not for the others. I need to make sure that she is seen by certain clinicians, and I need to make sure that certain things were done by certain staff members. That could be different from just the appointment, right? So the appointment will let me keep track of that, and most systems have that, and they'll say, oh, that's enough. And that, you're going to have alerts and things like that. What you really want is control, right? We talked about the 5 things that allow a practice to succeed, the 5 stages of a practice life cycle. One of those stages was control. And in order to control a practice, whether you're single specialty or multi-specialty, you need to be able to understand who's responsible for what and where the tasks are in relation to my cases, my patients, my specialties, and everything all together, right? And that's really where POI, where Practice On It, really shines, because what we do is we allow you to keep track of everything in exactly that way by task. And again, because we've got automation and things like that, you're not having to create all those tasks each time. Basically, you create the case just like you would, just like you would normally on maybe on paper or something like that. You create the case, and automatically the system will create all the tasks associated with that case and tie them to the patient, and then separate out your financials so that you can keep track of specialty A's financials, specialty B's financials, especially when you're dealing with insurance companies, so that you can very accurately report on how they're being treated with that specialty. So as we go through here, this allows us to monitor success and actually control how we implement changes, so that I can see, as a practice owner, I can see how my staff is doing. But now at the larger level, if I'm an entrepreneur, I'm a practice consultant or coach, or a franchise owner, now I can come in and have a single view that allows me to see practice A, practice B, practice C, all these practices, and be able to see at a glance who's struggling. So I'm going to be able to do a few things here. I'm going to be able to pick out either the practices or the staff members that are struggling. And then, instead of managing by fire, which results in people kind of yelling at each other or placing blame or anything like that, it allows us to come in ahead of that and say, hey, how can I help? Here are some things that have worked in the past. But let me first understand where it is that you're coming from, why it is that you're struggling when few others are, right? And this allows us to, first of all, make it easier for people to make those connections so that they can draw on connections that they already have in their brains, and so it'll be easier for them to make the switch. And it allows you, as the consultant, franchise, staff member, or coach, to come in and make recommendations that are now going to be readily accepted, and to be honest, should be excitingly accepted. So as we go through, again, I'm looking forward to more questions from you guys. I'm looking forward to more calls. I love them. They're so great. I'm learning so much from you guys. As we launch, this is going to be something that we talk about a lot. Is one of the pieces of our POI coaching program for our platinum partners. And so tomorrow, like I said, I'll go over more questions. I'll make more connections. And if there's something that you're looking to connect, just let me know, and I'll prepare it. So until tomorrow.